have to start by saying this projector actually has its own very special version of resolution and color. So this is supposed to be like a clear magenta, and this is supposed to be readable, but we'll make do. My name is Johan Öbrink, and that means my Twitter handle is @JohanÖbrink. I work at a company called iTeam. We do digital transformation of companies and organizations. Basically means that we go to them, we interview people, we talk to the management, and we sort of try to probe and find out what could be automated and digitized, and then we help them build that, and always deliver on a very steady cadence so that they can measure that on what revenues they get rather than what the cost is. And this talk is actually about, it's sort of a description of how we came to work the way we do and why we do it. And the first version of this talk was in Swedish, so it was called "Köp grisen I säcken," which is a Swedish proverb, or the antithesis of the Swedish proverb. And then I translated it to English, and it got the very short and succinct title, "Why Promising Nothing Delivers More and Planning Always Fails." So, the thing that we're going to be looking at for 45 minutes is basically this question. Why do so many IT projects fail? And I guess that you've all experienced this in some way. You've been in one, or you've seen one, or you know someone who has experienced an IT project fail. There's quite a popular cartoon about this, which I've been seeing going around the internet for a while, so it has to be true, which is this. And since this is not readable, I will just say what it says. So it says, how the customer explained it, how the... Whoa! Yes, that was interesting. Did my second screen just disappear? Let's reconnect that. Was that? Yeah. Are we there? Yay, let's go again. So, okay, that project failed. So, how the customer explained it, how the project leader understood it, how the engineer designed it, how the programmer wrote it, how the sales executive described it, how the project was documented, what operations installed, how the customer was billed, how the help desk supported it, and finally, what the customer really needed. And this is the sort of cartoon which is funny because it's true, although it's rather tragic. But the question is, like, why do so many people recognize this description? Why do we always end up in this situation? Well, to understand that, I think that we need to understand what sort of led up to the place where we are now. And I'm going to use the example of the corporate web. Doesn't have to be the corporate web, but it's a very good example to describe what's happened in the last few years. So, when it all started out, this was essentially the corporate web. It was a sign that said, we have these products at these prices, please come and buy them. And that was all. And then, of course, we evolved. So we started doing the same thing, but this time using Flash. But if you look at the web now, I think this is a more accurate description. Because now everything ties in to what we used to call the web. There is the point of sales, it's customer support, it's company description, it's inventory, logistics, everything is tied together. And you end up with a system looking like this. And this introduces complexity. Now there's a problem with complexity because complexity leads to risk. And risk leads to risk management, and also you all know risk management leads to suffering. And why is that? Well, if we look at how we manage risk traditionally, what we do is we try to contain it. We try to control it. So we do this. If we can just define what we're going to do, like really define it, then we can estimate how long it will take to do those things. And then, because we're not idiots, we know that there will be some things that we have missed, there will be unknowns, so we estimate the unknowns, and we put a premium there. And then we negotiate a contract, which basically means that we take the risk and we package it. And then we'll hand it over to our customer. And we end up with this, which is called the iron triangle. So we have the budget, we have the time, and we have the scope. It's all very well defined. And somewhere in the middle, hopefully at least, we have some sort of quality. And then something happens. Because we did estimate the unknowns, but the problem is that we can only estimate the known unknowns, as in the ones that we could foresee. But of course, then all the unknown unknowns comes to bite us in the ass, and this happens. The scope grows, the budget is fixed, the time is fixed, so the only thing that can give it is the quality. When I started thinking about this, I realized that this is actually a case of bad risk allocation. I never studied programming. I studied economics and learned to program in my room on a VIC-20 and then moving forward. So there's a concept in economics called risk allocation, and it basically looks like this. Okay, so we have two parties here. We have the client and we have the contractor. And this actually works even if it's in-house production. So then you can think of this as like business and IT. And we have two sets of risk. We have the economic risk, which basically means that we go over budget. Then we have the functional risk, which means it doesn't work. Okay? So these are the two risks. Now what you want to do with risk is you want to place it where it's the cheapest. You don't want it to cost too much. So let's look at the costs of risk. Well, we have the economic risk, which is actually more expensive for the contractor than the client, in most cases. It's more expensive for IT than it is for business, because this is the economically weaker partner, or part. Usually contractors don't have that long economic planning into the future. IT are usually measured on cost, so they're very susceptible to economic risk. Whereas the client is not as susceptible to economic risk, so it's cheaper over there. Then we have the functional risk, and that looks like this. It's basically free for us because we're programmers. If something doesn't work, we can fix it. But for the client, the cost can be astronomical, because what this means is like the e-commerce system goes down during Christmas shopping. That's basically a bad thing. So when we do this contract, what we're actually doing is we're packaging the whole risk, and we're saying, so we fix the price, which means we move the economic risk to the contractor. And that means that we ship the functional risk to the client. Why? Well, basically because when you're running out of time and you're running out of budget and the deadline is nearing, sometimes you tend to look away even if you know that there is an error there. Or you're not looking as hard. You won't raise your hand and tell the client that we need to work more on this when you're already out of time and money. Which basically means that we give them the functional risk. Now this is a case of really, really bad risk allocation. We placed all the risk where it's the most expensive. And of course that's a problem. But the really interesting thing is that that's actually our smallest problem. The biggest problem is that when we did this whole operation of defining everything up front, it leads to fixed requirements. Fixed requirements are now in the contract. And the problem with fixed requirements is that they lead to bad products. Because every time you try to plan in advance, something seems to happen. There's always some oversight. And when you realize that the map doesn't match with reality, you usually actually want to follow reality instead of going over a cliff. So, let's go back to this one. The most interesting thing about this picture is that of all the outcomes, there's one that's really impossible to reach. And it's this one, what the customer actually needed. Why? Well, because that's what they asked for. They didn't know what they needed. We could have found out along the way, but now the contract says we're not allowed to build this. And that's the problem with fixed requirements. And this is fairly basic stuff. So you might be wondering, like, if it's this simple, why doesn't anyone do this? Like, why do we keep doing it the wrong way? And I think it has to do with something that's called the Streetlight Effect. Streetlight Effect is it actually was coined in another cartoon where a guy is crawling around beneath a lamppost and he's looking for something. Sometimes it's a key, sometimes it's a coin. Someone tries to help him. After looking for a while, he says, "Are you sure you dropped it here?" And he says, "No, I dropped it over there in the park." "So why are you looking here?" "Well, because there is no light over there." And this is usually referred to when you're looking at when you have some numbers. You can classify them in two ways. There is accuracy, as in basically how many decimal points do we have, and the second one is validity, as in how important are these numbers actually. But we have the streetlight effect. Some numbers are harder to obtain, although they are more valuable, we tend to look at the numbers with a higher amount of accuracy. So we keep looking under the streetlight. And that is why we tend to focus on budgets instead of focusing on return on investment. Because while everyone knows that it doesn't matter if something costs 10,000 or 1 million, what matters is what you gain back. So if it costs 1 million and you make a revenue of 10 million, it's a good idea. If it costs 10,000 and you don't make any revenue at all, it's a bad idea. So why do we look at the budget? Well, because it's hard to find the numbers of the returns. We don't know what it's going to give. There is no light over there. So we look at the budget, although we know it doesn't matter. We also tend to prioritize our features by cost rather than importance. Why? Well, because it's harder to measure how important a feature is. There is no light over there. So we look at the numbers we have. We tend to prioritize quantity over quality. And we know that nobody cares about a product with like 1 million features if you don't know how to use them. Everybody knows that the iPhone revolutionized the handheld industry, although they were years behind all their competitors in terms of features, but the features they had worked. So we know quality is more important than quantity. Why do we look at the quantity? Well, because there is no light over there. It's harder to measure quality. And of course, we tend to look at the burn-up chart. Like, how far up are we? Instead of looking at the slope of it. How fast are we moving? So as long as we just cram more stuff in there, we're happy. instead of looking like how fast are we going, are we in better shape than when we started? Because it's hard to measure. There is no light over there. So that's why we do this, although we know it's wrong. Everyone knows it's wrong. So that's a pretty doom and gloom picture of the industry. But I think that there is actually an alternative. And part of this solution is to try to change the mindset. And specifically change it more into the mindset of a startup entrepreneur. And this works even if you're not a startup. It works within companies. We have a client called Vimla, which is part of Telenor. When they started this new brand, they actually started it as if it's its own company within the company. So they have the money to play with, and they can build the new product. But why is it a good idea to think like a startup entrepreneur? Well, it's because the incentives are actually sane. So let's look at some of the incentives. Usually in the startup world, you start off with a very well-defined idea, but you realize that the path is unclear because it's new. So you have to be able to change along the way as long as you know where you're going. They tend to work with a very dedicated team. It's not about like how much money do I make, what are my hours, and what is my health plan. Primarily, you're hoping for a lot of money, but it's all about the product. The dedication is to what you produce and what you deliver, not to having a job, although that's nice. They have a very strong focus on time to market, because it's an idea. It's something new. If we are second to the market, we might lose everything. So we need to get out there early. And they have to produce continuous and visible improvements, because there are investors involved, and investors want to know what their money is used for. We were working with an American startup which had used offshoring to build their product, and we came in and basically had to rebuild most of it from scratch. So we went from, they delivered like the first version really fast, and then the second version very, very slowly, and then the third version not at all. And then we worked at it for like a month, and we managed to get out a new version and go from a release cadence of once every 6 months to a release cadence of twice per day. That's really good, right? But it was too late. The investors had pulled out. So the business venture was no more. So you need to produce visual improvements, visible improvements, but you have to do it continuously. You can never stop. So you can't take on too much debt. And of course, since this is an investment, the return on the investment is what matters. Otherwise, they would have put the money in the bank. So the ROI will trump the budget every time. And the last part is this: failure is always an option. Now, we all know that things might fail, but we are afraid of it. We don't embrace it. But you have to realize when you're building something, when you're inventing something, failure is an option. And if you realize that it's better to fail sooner than later. So it's easier to put up your hand if you go in with a mindset that we might fail. Now, all these things lead to a way of working where you focus on producing some sort of minimum viable product. Now, there are some misconceptions about how to build an MVP, which I've seen in organizations. It's really hard to focus on like what's most important. And MVP sometimes tends to be rather like a full-featured version, but with very low quality, and that's not an MVP. So when you're building a minimum viable product, you don't do it like this. You don't build the entire foundation and then, like in step 4, you have something to release. That's not the MVP way. This is the MVP way. You build something that you can release in the first version and it works. And then you build a second version and you release it and it works. And you keep going. It means you will add features, but you will also rebuild features. You don't build like the data access layer and then you build the business layer and then you build the service layer. No, you build like one feature at a time, putting pieces of functionality into all the layers, and you release that feature and it's usable. But the thing is, if you want to do this, the first thing you need to understand is what is the goal. Now, it would be easy to assume that the goal of that picture was to build a car. But if it was, the sort of the second line with the skateboard and the scooter and the bike and motorcycle, that wouldn't make sense because none of them were a car. So it only makes sense if the intention, the goal of the product was something that moves people from A to B. If that is the actual goal, then you can release a skateboard. Sure, it's hard to bring your like week shopping, but you can move. It works. So you have to understand this goal. The second thing with an MVP is that you're going to release often. And how many of you love releases? A few of you. How many of you have ever been in a release that's essentially like a death march? Yes. I was talking to a guy who he'd been consulting on a project to rebuild the e-commerce platform of like the largest retailer in the UK. They made their release and then 11 people spent 24 hours non-stop doing the rollback. Now, if that's your release experience, if someone says we shouldn't release once, we should release 5 times, you will either shoot them or just leave. So in order to be able to do this, we need to reach 0 cost of release. I'm not saying low cost, I'm actually saying 0 cost. If the release is free, no one will ever object to making a release. It's basically pressing a button or like pushing to a branch or something like that. It's completely free. And the best thing when a release costs 0, as in time and money, is that it becomes a business decision. It's not about the fear of the IT department. It's a business decision. Should we release this now? Or should we release it on Monday? Well, leave it up to the business people. My usual image here is that we used to say we never release on a Friday, and now we say, of course we release on Fridays. We even release on Fridays after having a few beers. And then the other day was actually, I experienced a new one which was even better, which is, of course we release on Fridays. We release on Fridays even if we're in a car on the E4 coming home from skiing, because that's what a guy did. But the 0 cost of release requires a few things. First, of course, we require continuous delivery. Like, you need that button or that like push to this branch. It needs to be automated. So every time something ends up in like the master branch, it should be a releasable artifact. Otherwise, it's not free if you have to do something about it to release it. So we need continuous delivery. And this is something that organizations have started to look at. But what a lot of them don't realize is that you can't just have this unless you have the foundation of automated regression tests. Because the only way you can tell the business people that, sure, I'll release that shit, I'm a bit drunk, but that's okay, is if you trust it. And how can you trust that artifact at every point in time? Well, you need to have automated regression tests. so you always know if something broke. But the thing is, you can't just do this unless you have a foundation of continuous integration. Because I can't wait until something is a releasable artifact for the system to tell me that something broke. I need to be able to know that every time I check in code that is in conflict with code that someone else checked in. So I need the continuous integration, but of course, that also means that I need a continuous and fast test runner, so that I always know that nothing I produce contains any errors. Now, these, apart from the continuous delivery stuff, the other three are usually clumped together and just called automated tests. And I think that's a problem. I think we need to differentiate, because there are actually different purposes for different parts of this pyramid. The top part here is about building confidence. Building confidence in the product that it is releasable. Which means that if those automated regression tests take time, that's okay. If we can parallelize them and throw more machines at them, that's better, of course. But if it needs 1 more hour to run in order for us to be certain that it works, then it's okay. This is about confidence. Whereas this part is about speed. This is about a feedback loop. This is all about me never having to wait more than a couple of minutes to find out if my code was in conflict with someone else's code. And the continuous and fast test runner is about me not having to wait more than 250 milliseconds to know if my code was broken. And I say 250 milliseconds because that's the amount of time that it takes for the brain to perceive a waiting time. And if you have more than that to wait until your tests run, it means that you will constantly scope switch, context switch, from coding to did it work, coding to did it work, and then you will test less. So the speed of the test runner is really, really crucial. You need to have that feedback loop. You don't write tests because someone tells you to write tests. You write tests because it makes it easier to build stuff. It should be a support, not like, but usually when you try to introduce TDD into organization, it becomes more of like guilt-driven testing. It's like, you should test because otherwise you're a bad person and I don't want to see you. That's a really bad incentive. Tests are for me. It's to help me build the code in an easier way. So, let's assume we have this. If we have all this in place, we started focusing on return on investment instead of budget. We started releasing early, releasing often, at 0 cost. We have the entire feedback loop in place. Now a few things happen, which I find really interesting. And I'm going to illustrate this by 2 different hashtags from Twitter, where the first one is no projects. If we look at the definition of a project, because everything we do is projects, it's always a project. But what is a project? Well, the Project Management Institute describes a project as a temporary group activity designed to produce a unique product, service, or result. Well, sort of makes sense. Well, except for the temporary part, of course, because as long as we gain more value by keeping building the product, we shouldn't stop. So it's not temporary in that sense. Of course, it is temporary because at some point the universe will like dissipate into microwave radiation, so it will stop at some point, but before that, we don't know. Then there's Prince 2, which describes it as a temporary organization that's needed to produce a unique and predefined outcome or result at a pre-specified time using predetermined resources. And by now we know that's wrong. So, projects don't really work. Now, I'm not saying that you have to like cancel every project and reorganize your companies, but I'm saying all the tools and the processes we have in place to manage projects might not actually help you. So be very wary of whether you're measuring the correct thing. But the second one is even more interesting. Hashtag no estimates. Have you ever heard of it? The funny thing about this was they actually started out with a different hashtag. They started with the hashtag estimates are wrong, and it didn't work. Can anyone guess why? It didn't trend because no one disagreed. Nobody disagreed. Everyone knew that estimates are wrong. We all knew it. Every estimation we've ever done has been wrong. Of course it's wrong. So they changed it to no estimate, and Twitter just exploded with people shouting at them like, are you nuts? What do you mean using no estimates? And I go, like, well, you just told us they were wrong. Yeah, but we need them. Why? To plan. So you're going to plan using data that you know is wrong? It's better than nothing. And it's like, no, it's not actually. It's not better than nothing. It's actually worse than nothing, planning on numbers that you know are wrong. So how can we do this? This is sort of a slideception. This is a photograph of a slide from a talk by a guy called Vasco Duarte, who is one of the sort of thought leaders in the no estimates movement, which pretty simply describes how to work with no estimates. So you select the most important piece of work that you need to do. Then you break that down into risk-neutral chunks of work. I will return to that. Then you develop each piece of work, and you iterate and refactor. So first part is like choose the feature that's the most important, not the cheapest, the one that brings the most value to the product. But what is risk-neutral? Well, it basically means that you understand this piece of work. As in, you can fit it into your brain. So it's not like breaking the feature down into sub-features, it's breaking it down into units of work that you can manage to understand in one piece. Which basically means that you can replace your poker planning deck with this, which I got from Lunar Logic. So you basically have three sizes. It's either a 1, as in I understand it and it's risk neutral, or it's too fucking big. Or it's possibly no fucking clue. And we've actually used this, and it works. So you attack the feature, you go, is this a 1? No, it's too fucking big. Okay, so we'll just break it down. Is there any part of this feature that we can break out as a unit of work, which we could call a 1? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. So you start breaking it down, and you get into smaller and smaller pieces, and then you reach a few 1s, and then you're stuck with some NFCs. So you just put them in a pile of their own. You don't estimate those, because you know that you don't know. So you can do a spike on them, you can try to gather more information, you can just try to solve them and see how long it took, but don't guess, because it won't work, you don't have the information. And now everything is broken down into 1s. What we can do instead of estimating and using a burn-up is we can just measure the cadence. Like how many 1s run through the system at any given point in time. And when that starts to stabilize, which it should, there are like loads and loads, you can read about this if you want to fine-tune, but basically, if you have a sort of stable baseline of how many units of work gets pushed through the system over a day or over a week, you can actually start to make projections. Well, we broke this one, it's like 40 1s, and we usually produce 20 1s in a week, so it will probably take about 2 weeks. Could we do it in 1.5? Nope. We won't. The past data tells us we can't. So now this is not guessing, this is not estimation. This is measuring and breaking stuff down into parts that we can understand, which we need to do anyway, because we can't build anything that we don't understand. So that part of the conversation is not waste. It's actually useful. It produces value for the project to break it down. So now we're not wasting our time guessing. We're just doing what we're supposed to do, and then we measure the result. And this actually works. We do this with our clients. We don't promise stuff. We suggest or like collaborate with them to find the most important piece of the most important feature, and then we build that, and we measure how long it took, and they measure how much money they made, and we keep going. But the problem is usually to get like to the first step. Like, how do you get them to trust you to do this? And I would say this comes down to two parts. It's confidence and collaboration. The confidence part is all about the client has to have confidence in you. So you need to show them that you are trustworthy. The way we do this is the first thing is we say the client always owns the code. When we take on a new client, we help them set up a GitHub repo, which is theirs. They own it. And then they let us in. Which means they hold the keys. They can kick us out at any time. It's their code, it's their product. That's the first part. The second part is to make sure that there is no lock-in. As in, if they are ever like stuck with us because of technology choices or hosting or just badly documented modules or whatever, they have no reason to trust us. We need to make sure that we are not locked in. We need to be sure that we are replaceable because it's built on trust. We also need total transparency, as in not only not lying, but as in letting them know everything. The continuous delivery and continuous integration parts are really good in this sense, because they can see what we're doing. Every single day, every hour of the day, they know what we've built. And if we run into a problem, we tell them. And we work at their offices sometimes, and sometimes they come to our office. So we sit together, because they need to know everything. We need to maintain a constant and consistent quality. We can never start going downhill there. If we need to refactor, we just go back and refactor, keeping a slow and steady pace and keeping the quality level over all time. And a minimal cost of entry. And this is not just only if they want to replace us, but like we like to rotate people between the teams, because it's always good to have fresh eyes on the code and the practices, and it's easy to get home blind. But also someone might get sick or run over by a bus, and you know, when a colleague gets run over by the bus, the first thing you do is you think about the delivery, of course. No, but it needs to be really simple for people to get into the project. So for this, like we use Docker a lot, and we use Docker Compose. So setting up a project is usually like, it's a README. So it's like a few steps. It should never take more than a couple of minutes. I clone the repo, I follow the steps, I run Docker Compose build, Docker Compose up, and then everything runs. So I'm in. It's a minimal cost of entry. And of course, 0 cost of release. Because it should be their decision, not ours. So, on the other part, the collaboration part. The first part of this is do not negotiate price. And this is for the clients. Do not negotiate price. We will tell you how much we cost. We will see how long it takes. There is nothing to negotiate there. You can't say, can we have... Well, sometimes they say, well, can we have it for 1 million instead of 2 million? And we go, yeah, sure, we'll be half as big. That's no problem, but that's not a negotiation. This might sound like something that we are offering the clients, but it's actually not. It's something that we demand of them. They need to be in control. Because we know technology. We are programmers. We're really good at solving stuff, but we don't know the business. The client always has to be the captain. They have to tell us what their business needs at all times. And sometimes a potential client says, we don't have the time to do that. And so we answer, okay, so let's not do the project. Because you do projects because you expect revenue, and if you expect revenue, then you have time to take part in the project. If you don't have the time, it's probably not important enough, so you don't do it. It's that simple. They have to be able to accept the minimum viable product as an actual minimum. Of course viable, but it has to be minimal, so you get it out there early. And they have to dare to fail and realize that they have to dare to fail in time. A major Swedish bank were trying to replace their IT systems. They failed after 1 billion Swedish kronor, approximately. Wouldn't it have been great if they failed after just 1 million? But that's not the question they ask. They ask, how could we have succeeded? Well, sometimes the answer is you won't. So let's fail while it's cheap. So just to summarize, basically, fixed price projects are bad risk allocation and also give bad products. You need to focus on what matters, not what's easily measured. You have to release early and often and with zero cost. Try and don't be constrained by the project model, because it's basically not a project while you're releasing every day. And don't estimate. As in, really, don't. It doesn't work, and it's actually harmful. Because the worst part about the estimation is that even if you say that this is just a guess, not only does the client tend to hold you to it, it's even worse. You yourself tend to hold you to it, which means that you will get stressed when your estimation is running out, and then you tend to build bad code. And you tend to cheat in bad ways. So do not estimate. It actually destroys the quality. And it's not needed. You can make projections and you can measure without estimations. And of course, build the confidence that's needed so that you can collaborate. The customer should never be the enemy. They should be your best friend. A customer asked us once, we were signing a new contract and they wanted some clause in there because the judicial department, whatever it's called, wanted it there, about separating bugs from features. And we're like, we don't even know what's a bug and what's a feature. We don't know until it's tested on the client, on the end customer. So we can't put this in there. And he goes, well, shouldn't there be something regulating this? Like, shouldn't you have a contract, like work as friends, but have a contract as if you were enemies? And I said, no, we should work as friends, and we should have a contract as if we are friends, and then when we are not friends, we should stop working, because we will probably do a really crappy job. So he goes, oh, you want a short contract? Bingo. Because then we have to prove ourselves at all time. As long as we produce value, we continue to get the trust from the client, and so we work together. There are a few more slides about where to start, so but I'll just skip over them. You can have them later. So we'll just go. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the question for for the film, how do you react in an environment where it becomes like political? It might be that you're not doing a bad job, someone just doesn't like you, or you get into a conflict. Usually, it's actually the same thing. You can't do a good job if people don't like you or trust you, and the projection for the EU area is that by 2020 there will be a shortage of 1 million programmers. So what we do when we can't collaborate with the customer is that we actually tell them that we have to stop working with them, because there are other clients out there where we can produce more value, which raises the value of our company even more. So it's actually a very good idea to tell the client no and say, we have to stop working together. It might seem really harsh, but it's actually the best thing to do because there's so much demand out there. It's better to turn our attention to somewhere where it works. And of course, sometimes you will have to play the political game for a while, but always try to do it for as short a time as possible until you can get to the point where it's actually about transparency, not about politics. Any other questions? Nothing? Oh, you're just asleep. Huh? Yes. So the thing was, apart from the continuous delivery triangle, you should also have some sort of monitoring and logging on the application in production, so you can get feedback that way before the users find stuff out. And that, yes, I completely agree. This was basically focusing on like the getting stuff out the door part, but that's a really, really good idea. And you can also actually open up and ask your clients to tell you what's wrong, like the stuff that you didn't catch. Ask them to tell you because they will develop the product. Release is just the first data point. So, yep. So the question is, if we don't have any lock-in and we abandon clients when it doesn't work, doesn't mean that we will basically be replaced by outsourcing or become outsourcing for... But, I mean, it could happen, but it hasn't so far. One of the biggest clients we had, we actually ended the contract there by getting them to the place they wanted to be. We educated their team. We helped them recruit new programmers. We helped them change the processes. We helped them build the software they needed. And then when we left them, it was because they owned their product now and they could manage it themselves. So we go out of there and they are really happy, and we have something more in our portfolio, and more companies call us to help them reach that same point. So yeah, I think it's always a good idea to do a better job, even if it means leaving what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah, so the thing is, if you think you're done with the client, it's just because you've failed at finding out what more they need to do at the moment, because there's always more to do. Yes, it is, but it's not always the case that we are the ones that should do it. Sometimes they need to, as in the client I was describing, they needed to own their product because it was their core business. And we know that they will call us again if they need help to like get to another sort of next level or start something that's really new to them. But their core business, they have to be able to own that. So it's actually better for us to teach them how to take care of it. But generally, yes, I agree. There will be a lot of stuff to do before we annihilate humanity and the singularity. I think we have to stop. So, last thing, eWork are now sponsoring for coffee break.